we were talking about how champagne can work if the yields are going to be, consistently lower. This is what you were talking about, not Tom?
Yes, well, I was talking about when we lost you, and apparently I was still out
Yeah,
there,
sorry.
and people could hear me and see me. I started talking about a stat that I saw about French supermarket champagne sales, and
Hmm.
explaining that French supermarkets have a really different lineup of champagne than, if an English person walks into a French supermarket, they will see a bunch of champagnes they've never seen before in their life, because French supermarkets sell a lot of much more affordable brands of champagne and houses that we don't really see. There's the sort of bottom of the pyramid, really, of
They
champagne.
do actually, they do sell quite a lot of houses as well. If you
Yeah,
look at distribution,
absolutely.
if you look at the stats, because in the CIVC report, which coming out any
Mm,
day now,
yeah.
soon, I think, when they speak about the French market, they speak about that distribution,
Mm,
and you see that a lot of the big brands are there, and obviously me living here, so the
yeah.
different. I don't go to the supermarket that often, but when I do go, when I have to leave my little organic shop and I need to
Oh,
go to
yeah.
market, you see there are the big brands. In Pierre, there's just about every brand, same as in Champfleury, in Leclerc, and Carrefour, they have even a wider selection.
Yeah.
Here in Dizzy, they have a big selection, but it's different. They have also different things. But you do see also grower brands, like you were saying, that probably do not make it to England. And I'm not even
Yeah.
sure if they're making it further
No.
away.
Well,
I'm
I mean, you see.
realizing my dog is snoring now.
So if you I mean, I've seen it in French supermarket, medium size, where you walk in and Veuve Clicquot and Moet Chandon are the most expensive champagnes. What is what I was
Yes.
saying, and I think what there's this kind of large layer of houses and producers that we don't
Mhm.
necessarily see here. You're thinking about. I mean, even here we don't really ever see brands like Franken, or we don't see Mercier doesn't come here. These
Okay.
kind of cheaper
Approximately
houses. There's
or
this kind of layer of the bottom of the pyramid, and that when you looked at French supermarket sales being really hit last year, that sort of 14-15%, if I find my figure. Okay, 13.5% with an 8% drop
yeah.
in value last year. I think you've got to be looking to a lot of this part of Champagne is kind of the one for me that seems like it's in trouble a bit, and a lot of the houses and the growers, obviously the big houses are part of the same ecosystem, but I think there's this part of Champagne that sometimes doesn't get much press attention. It doesn't get
It
a
does
lot of media attention,
here in France.
but it's part of Champagne's ecosystem.
Mm.
Those grapes have got to go somewhere. They're cheaper grapes. They're being grapes that have been wines or base wines that have been bought in cheaply from here and there, assembled sometimes, and they're part of the system. And where do those? What happens to the bottom of the pyramid if the demand for champagne, which is basically traditionally been sold on the name champagne, these producers don't do marketing, they don't do PR. The name champagne is their marketing, and
They,
they
you
sell
know,
for €20. What happens when that part of the market sort of
oh,
disappears a bit? Will it disappear? No, but it
well,
feels
I
like
think
that's where the trouble is.
there's a yes and there's a no. So obviously Mercier is a brand, is
Yeah,
historically brand part of LVMH, and LVMH made a choice a long time ago because they had Moet and Chandon and Mercier historically
yeah,
to keep Mercier in France. So I
yeah.
think maybe you can get a little bit in Belgium, but not that much.
Mm,
Vranken is basically so Pommery. Vranken bought Pommery. Vranken is part of a big Belgian distribution chain,
yeah,
supermarket chain, basically, and so they have the Vranken brand and they have the Pommery brand. So, or sometimes it's called Pommery Vranken. But those wines are sold in different markets. But for instance, when I come to England and I go to the supermarket, I see brands that I don't know here because
Yeah,
they are supermarket brands,
yeah,
and there are also
exactly.
brands that are made, negotiants brands
Yeah,
that are made specifically for the British market, specifically for the
yeah,
American market. I think the issue that we have, because when we look at the champagne market as a whole, you pointed on it when you said champagne sells the wine. And today, champagne does not sell the wine anymore. We have gotten there. And, this is something that Maxime Touba was talking about. He said we
mm,
cannot become like Sauternes, for instance, which was a very prestigious
yeah,
appellation, but today it's only drunk Christmas time with foie gras and only in France. Okay. So, I think he did not want to go to Bordeaux, but I think Bordeaux was on his mind if
well,
he
yeah,
spoke about Sauternes. Because I remember when I was a child, Bordeaux was what everybody drank and read, and it didn't really
yeah,
matter where it came from. As long as they had a word Bordeaux on it, it would sell. And today, having the word Bordeaux and not something else, not another brand, is probably negative marketing rather than anything else. You must
yeah,
remember there's people in the Bordeaux appellation that were talking about people taking, their wines outside of the appellation and making vin de France. So this is obviously something that today is not possible in Champagne, and I cannot even see being possible in the long run,
mm,
because a big part of the SGV lobbying is to prevent table wine or,
yeah,
wine outside of the Champagne appellation to be made in Champagne, because they want to maintain the control, obviously, because they say, what brought, or what made our appellation great was that we could control everything. The problem, the other side of that is that there actually is no control. If you read his or if you listen, obviously I listened to it before I got a hard copy of it, but when I was reading the hard copy again, he Tobias is pointing on the ecological problems, and he's saying every single person has a responsibility. And it's the same as he did when he spoke about, the social responsibility, because obviously he's saying we're going to go to harvest, we're going to have to harvest manually. These are the things. But he is very aware that there's no controlling system. And this, for the first time, actually, he's really worried about this because of Flavissance Doré, because he cannot force people to go and check. Okay, so it's heading home, if you see what I'm saying.
well, they
Because
sort of are trying though. I mean,
yeah,
it's
but
quite
no, but they're
quite.
not. They can't really
They can't do
force
it ultimately.
anything. They have asked for arrêté préfectionnel, but they're not going to get them, just yet. It's the same as with, in the harvest. In the harvest, they pull things off because the state was with it. Okay, so they know very well that the ecology, for instance, is very important for Champagne's image. Um, but they don't really want to talk about it. They just talk about quality, knowing very well that, they're talking about sorting at tank level, which basically tells you everything what we need to know about a lot of the grapes that are
Mm,
delivered at harvest. So, it's a very difficult thing. So, I think for the first time, and I think it's actually really for the first time, because I've seen the change in Maxime Toubar,
mm.
the SGV is realizing that the honeymoon is over. Okay, so
Yeah,
that we need to do something else, but they are between a rock and a hard place
yeah,
because, to use Trumpian terms, the base wants quantity. It doesn't
yeah,
want
yeah,
anything else. And obviously, the houses want quality. The
yeah,
houses are talking about ecology. When you see the reports published, you said to me, ecology is not important to sell the wine. I think ecology has become important
mm,
to sell the wine if Champagne wants to maintain its price point. And most importantly, it is important to sell non vintage wine. So, that
yeah,
bottom of the
yeah,
pyramid, as you said, because even, uh, you know, Moet and Chandon and Veuve Clicquot, Yellow Label, they are part of that. Basically, every non-vintage wine, which when I went to the US, for instance, I was very surprised to see that those wines really were the cheapest wines, because it's not necessarily the case here or
yeah,
in in England or in other places. So what's going to happen there? So obviously, if the big houses are not selling anymore, they will want a smaller appellation.
Yeah.
Today, everybody's talking about 9,500.
Yeah.
This could drop to 9,000.
But what
You know,
happens? But it's an interesting question for me. Like, what happens if you have if 9,500 as an appellation? So people that are watching champagne, I'm always a bit worried about talking about appellations and yields, assuming everyone understands them. Obviously, people working in Champagne and living in Champagne do, but it is it is a bit of a baffling concept because I think again the way that yields get communicated gives the impression that somehow the yields that are decided are linked to what's going on in the vineyard or something, but it's purely
it's
it's
the
purely
yields. The
purely
yields
commercial.
are
And
very, very much based, as you know, the commercial yield is set on sales expectations in the next 2 years.
yeah,
So it's always been like this, as you explained in the previous video. You said, in the bit that we're going to try and merge, you explained that obviously, historically, Champagne had gone through difficult periods. They learned from these lessons, and that is where they got this idea from. But I think there are two things. I think with climate change and with ecological restrictions, because even though, for instance, on herbicides, they are not respecting anything to do with glyphosate, eventually they're going to have to, because glyphosate is going to be taken off the market. So it's as easy as that. And we have noticed as well that huge appellations, we had a big one in 23, but generally we either have a very wet year, which we have small appellations because of disease, waterlogging, sick vines, all of that, okay? And on the other hand, we have very dry years where it's difficult to have huge yields. On top of this, with Flavescence Doré, they are pushing for people to replant their vineyards. Replanting in Champagne at the moment is at a historical low, so at 1%. So they've changed rules to do with the reserve, that you can
yeah,
pull vines off up now for sanitary reasons as well, and that you can pull up to 9,000
yeah,
kilograms out of the reserve for the next 5 years. Now
yeah.
that should give you an indication of what the appellation will be, even
Mm,
though this is not sold like this. But
mm,
this basically gives you an idea, because
yeah.
you need to be pretty close to the appellation to be able to do this,
But
uh,
yeah, the
which
interesting
means
question
that
is
this is part of it. On top of that, when these vineyards are going to be replanted, the idea is for these vineyards to be replanted in the vine similage system, so in
mm,
the wide system, white grapes. So basically, we plant grapes on rows 2 meters apart from each other, higher, like it is everywhere
mm.
else in the world. Okay, at that moment in time, you cannot maintain these big yields. I had data when I wrote about it from New Zealand, where they can irrigate all of it. It's very difficult to get
Well, they
yields.
can't force people to replant in Vincime large though, and my understanding is
They
some of the
can't, but I think they are, in Champagne, everything is sold on cost. Vin Similage is significantly
yeah,
cheaper to run than, the regular vineyards. Now, but
yeah,
I think there will be two things. Is the first thing is when the yields stay low like they are now, okay? So 10,000 is the bare minimum, okay? So under 8,000, a lot of people will go bankrupt. But under
yeah,
10,000, a lot of people will go bankrupt as well, because they have loans and everything else out there for 10,000 kilograms per hectare. So small appellations means that, basically it means that Champagne will change. So
yeah,
it will, what happened in Cognac will happen here. So there will be a consolidation of the grape growers. So instead of having a lot
yeah,
of really small grape growers, you will have bigger grape growers who then have bigger parcels, who can then plant in vine similage,
yes,
mechanize everything. This is the whole thing behind it. And also, the reason why the CIBC is pushing vine similage is it is more ecological. And I am not
yeah,
for
but
or against,
yeah,
but if you have half the plants on a hectare of land, you're going to use less products. It's as easy as that. Okay,
Although,
so
as when we both read the report, I remember a few years ago, I believe the report into Vintemilage did, which, if people are wondering, we're rabbiting on about VFL Vintemilage. It's a scheme authorized in Champagne to be able to plant at a much lower density with higher canopies. So much looks a lot more like if you actually go to England or to Franciacorta and look at their vineyards,
yeah,
they're
you know,
basically the same idea, rather than a very dense plantation. And at the moment, Champagne is often around 8,000 plants per hectare. And actually, I looked it up. The bud count per hectare. So not only is it regulated how many plants you put in a hectare, but then the pruning systems that are authorized to be used set a level of buds per hectare that you're allowed to leave when you prune, which then of course sets your potential crop load. And in Champagne, that is 180,000 buds per hectare. So it's 18 buds per square meter, which is, if you compare that to a lot of quality wine regions, it's very high.
I
So
know.
not only is Champagne very dense, I looked at, obviously it's a very different requirement of the kind of grapes you're looking for, but it's a lot of there's a lot of fruiting buds in a hectare in Champagne at the moment. That's just the way it's always been, and it's not to say that
And that
everyone
will
leaves that, but
change.
it's very high.
That
Sorry.
will change with the Vin Similage because the only reason they pushed the Similage,
Yeah.
Vin Similage through the SGV, remember it's the SGV with the ODG, so they regulate the cahier des charges, so the rule book basically,
Yeah.
is because they were going to have the same yields.
But
Yield
it's
in
not.
Champagne is
Yeah.
for growers is the most important,
Yeah.
but I saw studies which I
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to see from the Crédit Agricole, which is the biggest bank and therefore the biggest
Yeah.
vineyard owner in Champagne, and they were talking about yields between 6 and 8,000.
Yeah. I mean
7,000
that
the
makes
most,
sense.
which
Everyone
makes
that knows, you plant in that scheme, you can get larger. I mean, England, we plant in basically that exact scheme, and we have a climate that is much less favorable to fruit set sometimes. And I know people that have, in 2018, some people have got, 12, 15
Mhm.
per hectare in exceptional years. But usually the goal is if you get 8, that's pretty good going. And in a slightly more favorable climate, yes, you might get 10. But I mean, the idea that people will really would be regularly expecting the same sort of yields in that lower density is not really realistic. You're promising people
No,
lower
no,
yields and much lower cost to balance it out.
yes, but the thing is, I saw the study. Okay, and I love data, I love studies,
Mm.
all of those things. So they gave one number for
Yeah,
three grape varieties
yeah, yeah,
over 20 years, an average, to compare the Vin
yeah.
Similar
Yeah.
with the regular one. So, for instance, in Meunier, there was no
Mm.
yield. But in the Côte des Blancs, they were outside the appellation. So they were
Yeah,
outside the appellation. So they were over 20,000
yeah, yeah,
kilos per hectare. So it's skewed because what you must remember is in the study, it depends how much land everywhere you had
yeah,
that was planted in this way. And because they had more land in the Côte des Blancs planted like this
yeah.
skewed the figures because obviously they needed skewed figures to get it through. Now, I think when
Mm.
this system is put in, so for instance, there's houses that have done it, you know, uh, they are not there to produce hugely. A lot of houses today don't even have 10,000 kilograms per hectare.
Yeah,
They buy it up from others. So I think that they're already thinking differently. When Ludovic was saying
yeah,
smaller but better, obviously he's thinking of this. However, I asked David Chatillon, uh, for one of actually the last piece I wrote for Wine Search. I spoke to David Chatillon, and I asked him about this because he knows Ludovic really well. They were at school
mm,
together, okay, and he said that he did not agree with this.
mm,
So there was a whole lot of reasons that he gave.
mm.
I picked one that was the most neutral so that they couldn't say that I was like trying to, look for issues where they weren't. But basically, he was saying, no, defending the houses. So he was giving a political answer. So he was saying, no, I don't believe this, because he was talking about the size of the houses. But I think he knows, because he's been talking about this, that the yields will have to come down. And what
I know.
happens
Yeah.
if this happens? The big winner will be LVMH.
Yeah. I mean,
As easy as that.
the situation with great prices is a slightly strange and artificial one. It still is with LVMH continue with strong competition, and we might, who knows what will happen, but maybe we'll still see strong competition for great prices even in a weaker market. And you know, if you have someone like LVMH who is prepared to play a very long game,
Mm-hmm.
in order to win up great contracts, and as you say, convert to a more efficient, cheaper type of viticulture, then that can really, you know, that's in their interest if they can afford to use it. Because obviously, despite the reserves, I mean, I would disagree that when you look at Flavescence and where it is and where it's happening, it's converting to Vin Semi-Large is rather complicated, and it's a completely different system. You know, I think you need different
Yeah, but
tractors, you need access to it, you know, and in a very parcelized parts of Champagne, I've seen some, you know, out in, you know, in the Aube and in the Marne Valley, and but are we going to see tons and tons and tons of Vin Semi-Large in the Côte des Blancs on the Montagne de Reims? I'm not holding my breath at the moment. I think people will just simply replant. I mean, you need to be able to drive a different kind of tractor down your road. And, you know, imagine if you've got one plot in Vincennes Large and one plot in normal plantation, you know, 2 kilometers away. It's a bit of a headache. I mean, it suits producers who can do it logistically. But I'm not. I don't know. I mean, do you see much around you?
well, you know, obviously in Ovili it's very difficult because I don't think they can plant
Yeah.
fin similage, because, you know, I was one of the people actually, because I'm not necessarily, oops, sorry, against, there we go, we're back, sorry, yeah, no, I'm really bad with this, as I say. So, you know, obviously in Ovili it's quite complicated because we are UNESCO village.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Yes.
you know, with all of this. But you know, Vince Village is growing pretty quickly. There's
Yeah.
been there, you know, houses are planted in AI. There's obviously some
Yeah.
that traditionally were there in the Côte des Blancs that Moet had there that were
Yeah.
outside of appellation. But
Yeah.
you know, it's worry, so it can become appellation. But I think one of the things that you are not taking into account, part of the Vince Village project, is also the expansion of the appellation. So you mustn't forget that a lot of
Yeah.
houses today, Tubar put a halt on it because he said he does not want to expand the appellation until the Europe locks down that we can only have appellation wine in Champagne, which is pretty difficult. You know,
Mm.
you know, they are lobbying severely, but this would be a, you know, obviously they don't want to say this, but this would be a very complicated precedence because it means that people in Champagne have different rights, less rights than people in the
Yeah.
rest of Europe, and I'm not sure how you can go and defend that,
But do you think the
especially
appellation is going to?
especially when Champagne is not doing well. Okay,
Yeah.
this,
Well,
you
yeah.
know, I'm not talking about this, but at the moment it's not doing well. So you know, we have these different things. I don't know. I know that a lot of growers, you know, when it went through, when it was voted basically almost unanimously. There was like a handful of people that voted against, which were better producers that we know. Okay.
Yeah.
But really, there were very, very few that voted against it. And why did the whole of the SGV voted for it? Because it is cheaper. That
Yep.
is why I voted for it. And
Yep.
so I think, yes, you know, there's areas which are very difficult. You know, obviously in the Vallée de la Marne, you have very steep vineyards, there's different things. Having said that, you have extremely steep vineyards in the Mosel planted in this system.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you can. There are ways of different ways of planting steep vineyards. That It depends how then
It's,
you're into how do you work them is the question, isn't it? Because
no, no, it is.
you're not
No,
going to get a
it
Vichy
is.
bot up there.
It is a question of how you work it. But if you see, for instance, if you see the way they want to regulate the herbicides, okay, to talk about my favorite subject.
Your favorite topic.
So there's a proposal for the cahier des charges, which was bounced back, but it's going to go back in, so the opposition will be overridden. Um, where they suggest to ban herbicides in the middle of the row, and they define the middle of the row 40 centimeters from the vine each side. So most vineyards planted, yeah, most vineyards are planted, between, let's
Yeah,
say, 90 centimeters and 110,
yeah.
110. So we're looking between 10 and 30 centimeters. However,
Hmm.
this is done for the vin similage, because
Ah,
if you are in vin
yeah,
similage, you are in a different situation, because at that point in time you have 80 80 centimeters taken off 2 meters, so it's
yeah,
120, so it's less. At that moment in time they still can't use glyphosate, because basically that still is not in
yeah.
accordance with the regulations. But what we see is that it allows um, the the I forgot what I was saying. I was looking at my phone. I'm
Ah,
scared that I'm going
you're
to
talking about
that it's
the
going to
amount of
overheat again. Um,
yeah,
but basically, you everything has been, um, people are thinking about the vin similage already, because there's a lot of reasons, and I think a big reason when nobody talks about is European requirements about the ecology by 2030.
yeah,
So this has happened already today. You must remember, if LVMH today is organizing the living world soil, or
yeah.
world living soil,
World living soil.
if it's organizing that, and it continues to do, because they had an art event in Paris like a few days ago,
Oh,
because they send me invitations. So at that moment in time, they are not protecting their soil, or they're not doing this for marketing reasons. They have understood that if they do not regenerate the soil, they will have nothing left. Okay, it's
yeah,
as easy as that. And so we see the same in Cava. We were going to talk about, the global market.
yeah,
So, say for instance, Cava's going organic. Cava's not going organic. You know this better than me, but they're not going organic because Copinat went away or because of a marketing thing. They're going organic because today there is no water in Catalonia. They cannot uh, irrigate, even though they want to, because there's just no water available for
yeah,
them to
yeah.
irrigate. And if they continue to put herbicides, which is the only pesticide commonly used all the time, because they don't have, the powdery and the downy mildew that we have here,
Yeah.
uh, they basically will have no yields anymore, because the soil will not keep up. So
Well, it's
that is the main reason, I think.
I think, I mean, yes, Penedès and Catalonia is a kind of, it's like in so many ways the polar opposite to Champagne, and I think whilst it's usually much easier to be organic there, 2020 in Catalonia, where they actually had kind of a very oceanic year and enormous amounts of rainfall, they couldn't cope with it at all. They had absolutely manic disease pressure. And the wines from Catalonia in 2020 are rather similar to Champagne in 2017, for example. A lot of the similar characters. So, I mean, ordinarily, it's much, much, much easier to be organic there because they have, as you say, very, very little downy mildew pressure, which is obviously, it's kind of the big one. But the flip side of the dryness there is, I think, and obviously, I obviously see your photos a lot of bare vineyards. Well, if you go to Catalonia in the summer at the moment, you
Yes, I
see a
know.
lot of bare vineyards. It's so dry there, they can't grow cover crops. Some of them
No,
can over winter, But
They
a
can
lot of
in
producers,
winter, but
they
what
can
I'm
in winter.
saying is they are planting now cover crops and they're keeping them as long as they can
Yeah,
because they are trying to regenerate their
yeah,
soil.
they have to. Yes.
You know, I, I'm writing this book. I've done a whole thing on,
Mm.
regenerative farming. Like I don't know, I'm hoping to bring it out later
Yeah.
this year, running late because I was a bit over enthusiastic with going through all these studies. But we see, the academic data doesn't lie. I believe academic data is like key for those things, and it doesn't lie. We need to regenerate our soil, and this is something that Champagne will have to do as well. So
Great.
Trente Glorieuses, which is basically the time between the 70s and 2000 when champagne grew, when everything went crazy, is over. And we are not going back because first of all, there's more competition. People have a choice of different wines that they can
Yeah.
buy, which they didn't have before. And with that choice come um, quality expectations, especially at the price point, which is, I think, where Bordeaux fell over. Bordeaux fell over when New World Wine flooded the market at a lower price and better quality. It's not more complicated than that. So, so Champagne has that thing, and I think their soils. You mustn't forget that a lot of the soil here is eroded and quite badly eroded. And it's not really that easy to bring life back to an eroded soil, as I
No.
found out from the studies. I thought it was easier, but apparently it's not that easy.
Yeah.
So if you want to know, for instance, here in Auvillers, we have a lot of eroded soil. So, if people want to continue to produce, they will have to do something about this. They cannot continue to do this. One of the things I mentioned to Maxime, I sent him a message to say thank you for letting me into the press conference, because of our difficult relationship. And he personally let me in, so I really did appreciate it.
Mm.
But in that message, I did tell him that it's up to him to take the appellation to the future. He fought,
Mm.
you know, uh, nail and tooth, basically, really hard in the French Parliament to get better tax laws to
Yeah.
protect growers for their land. But if you cannot grow anything on the land anymore, there's really
Well,
not much you can do about
well,
it.
the interesting question is if the yields, and it was the kind of one I came back to earlier. What does it take if we see, let's say, a yield of 9,500? And by the way, this means an authorized yield. This is what champagne
Yes,
produce
yes, yes.
growers are. For our listeners, this what not what's on the vines. This is what they will be allowed to turn into champagne plus some reserve. If we see that much lower, it's not going to mean immediately that lots of growers are going to suddenly think, well, you know what? I'm only going to be allowed to pick 9.5 + 2 or something. So I might as well become organic. I might as well plant some cover crops. I might as well stop herbicide. I might as well prune shorter. I don't think that's going to happen quickly. I
No,
think it
but
will take some years of that for people's mindsets to
yes,
be
but
forced by
the thing is,
stick
they
rather
started.
than carrot.
Doesn't forget this, Tom. They started this in 2018. They started this 7 years ago because they did not, to quote Barrière, Jean-Marie Barrière, who was the president of the houses, the UMC at that time, he said that if Champagne did not want to be shoved there, it would have to go there and prepare. So COVID is what, got everything upside down again and they stopped. But unfortunately, this system that they have, where we have the grapes on wheels, so non-appellation grapes that become
Yeah,
appellation grapes, and we
yeah.
sort at tank level and we do all these different things, that does not work with the European transparency laws.
Mm.
And eventually, a big company like LVMH is not going to have its stock, all of its stock, I'm not talking about the champagne stock, all of its stock pushed off the stock exchange because growers want to continue this system. They will lay down the law. You asked me how quickly can this work? Look at cognac. Cognac, it took very little time.
Mm.
They did a lot of damage in the first year and they finished it off in the next 2, 3 years. So
Mm.
this can go very quickly. You must remember that deadline of 2020-30 is outside of Champagne's, you know, realm. They can't do anything
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Europe. And it's not just to do with the wine industry. So Europe is not likely to change this, if you see what I'm saying.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they may, they could get a derogation, they could get things, but they will not be able to push this. And I think the houses are seeing this today.
mm.
uh, who has the power in Champagne? The SGV, indeed, because they have the cahier de charge. But the real power, like in any capitalist society, is the people that buy. And
Yeah,
if you stop buying because of, when the yields go down, they can refuse grapes. They used to refuse grapes.
yeah,
Refusing grapes is not something that never happened in Champagne. It
no,
was
no,
common till the
yeah,
90s. So they can go back. They will, and I think with the image tarnished, these big brands, they have a lot to ride on, and they will, they are standing strong. So I spoke to Jean-Baptiste Lecaillon, and he said that he spoke to the courtiers, so the people that buy the grapes from the growers or that organize the contract. And he said prices will not go up because, we have the crisis. Prices will not go up, but the appellation's going down.
yeah. I mean,
And if
it's
Goodrich says this, it's pretty sure LVMH will say the same thing.
I mean, it's very, very complex because then you can talk about prices in abstract, but then if you're the chef de cave of a upcoming house, or and you're faced with, well, I could get 10,000 liters of Grand Cru Chardonnay from Avis for this price from a conventional or untraceable, through the co-op or something, or I can get 10,000 or I can get it from here and there from this nice family that I know. It's all grapes are not born equal as well, and
No,
the
no,
Cote de
because
Blanc is a very
grapes can
interesting.
become Grand Cru. Don't you worry about it. In 2003, a lot of black grapes became Côte des Blancs Grand Cru.
Well, some
So,
paperwork. Yeah,
there's here in Champagne, you can be many things. We still have, trans rights so far. So, grapes can change gender and color and village and
oh,
whatever else. However, the EU wants to stop this, and
yeah,
I think, eventually. Uh, I wrote not long ago that actually I wrote this on Wine Search that Champagne, basically skirts around the law, to suit itself. But we saw how badly this backfired in 2023. And, they are very worried about this. I will tell you a big part of the AGM of the SGV was hammering down those messages
yeah.
and
But
saying
they don't want it to
"Oh,
happen again.
it's up to you, a lot more than it was last year."
Yeah,
So they know very well that if there's another scandal, because there were a few issues last year, very little, but there
yes,
were a
yeah,
few.
yeah,
But if there's another scandal, they know that this is not going down well. And
yeah,
so, you know, at that moment in time the houses will stop buying. I think the AGV also knows that the good days of selling grapes are over. They are pushing people to make their wine, and they are pushing people in the cooperatives.
yeah.
Okay. um
Well, that's a topic for another day. I'd love to talk
that's another,
about
yeah, topic.
cooperatives because they're again another huge part of Champagne system that is
Yeah, but
largely
we don't, what I'm
responsible
saying, we
for.
don't need to talk about it, but that's what they
Yeah,
are trying to do. They know they need to make wine, but we come back eventually. Why is the yield coming down? Is because today champagne made the way it was before is not desirable anymore. There's other alternatives, and people will pick other alternatives. The desirability hasn't been tarnished at the top of the market. It has been tarnished at the bottom of the market, as you say. And the issue, and that's what we've been talking about, the issue is that the whole balance, very delicate balance that champagne has, is based on that bottom of the market, basically the non vintage wines. And that's, they need to make non-vintage wine desirable again. And Maxime Toubar was, and even the Groupe des Jeunes, if you want, so even the younger ones, they were talking about cocktails. If they want to be,
Mm.
eating with Prosecco for cocktails, they're going to have to struggle,
Work
they,
that out
they're
there.
going to have to lower prices to start off with. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm not
I
sure
think
if
it's,
how
there's just
go.
there's a large tranche of champagne brands which are whose market is getting older, and who's, and they can't all make it in the same way that, that some of the big maisons are able to with their marketing campaigns. They're not all going to be able to adapt in the same way. So it's going to be an interesting sort of 5 years to see what happens to some of
Right.
those brands we've been seeing on the French supermarket shelf. I think maybe more 10 years with population age and demographic change and things. But
Prosecco's fourth biggest market is
yeah,
France,
yeah, yeah. There
which is crazy.
you
Because, I would think it would be Germany or Belgium, big sparkling wine drinking markets. It's here. And,
go.
I remember living when I first came to Champagne. Actually, I went to look at the supermarket because you told me that there were so many different things. And I didn't even believe you when I first met you that you told me that they had these different wines in the supermarket. So I went and I was shocked because
Mm,
when I first came here, all you could get was champagne.
okay.
And
Yeah,
then with some cava and then now some others. But I think with the sparkling wine market where it is, uh, two things that Yvette van der Merwe was talking about. They said that the opportunity is to go and think outside the box. So thinking about lower alcohol wine, which today is not possible in Champagne, but
mm,
there's other sparkling wine regions, Prosecco, that's already doing it. So,
yeah,
this could come to us. And then the other one is alternative packaging. So I don't know where they're going to go with those neck foils, but it would be really stupid to continue with it.
yeah.
Because, when she was talking about alternative packaging, she was talking about sparkling wine in a can. I was like, excuse me,
Well, it's a
back with
yeah.
everybody.
Some
But
people have tried to do this. It's a big
doesn't it?
challenge. Big challenge. And you got yes, you could. Yeah, I mean, going the technical challenges of putting
But
sparkling wines in a can.
they could
Is
be,
really,
they could be with transvalage, with whatever,
yeah,
it would be complicated. But what
yeah,
I'm saying is these were the things that she was talking about. And then in that report that I looked at when I published my post yesterday, they were talking also, about organic and biodynamic. So they mentioned Rudra and they
yeah.
mentioned MH. Well, they mentioned Dom Perignon because this is getting
I read that. I had a
sorry,
look at
I'm
that
gonna
report. It
move
was
it
the
again
what
because
was it
I'm
called?
again.
Oh, I've lost you.
You got it there?
Yeah,
It's halfway
yeah,
through where they're talking, she talks about Dom Perignon, they say the houses are doing things, but as we know, there's more things to be done because those Dom Perignon wines and Dom Perignon that I can tell you because they have a lot of vineyard here in Auvillers, and I can tell you that they've changed significantly, quietly but significantly, the way of farming. So they are, obviously in line with this, idea that they're going to farm regenerative. All of that is in line, but it just shows you that the customer is becoming pickier and he has more choice. So at that moment in time, Champagne will have to up its game. Now, personally, I'm not really worried about the legacy of Champagne, which a lot of
mm,
people may find surprising, seeing what I write. But Champagne historically, I love facts, data, history, all of that. And historically, Champagne has always thrived on in a crisis. So that is good. But in a crisis, it also always transformed the way champagne was at the time.
mm,
So the champagne we know today will not be the champagne we have tomorrow. But same as with cognac. I know cognac is having issues between China and the US not buying, but the appellation significantly improved its standing in the world.
Yeah. Yes,
And
yeah.
so, sorry, it says low battery again, so that's it. So
Well,
yeah,
I think champagne's it's hard to call what champagne's standing in the world is, but I think it's still very strong. But I mean, it's the
it's.
there are signs of some crumbling
I think it's like America.
foundations in areas, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, I would compare it to the US. Okay,
Mm.
US, we still look up to it, but at the same time, we see it fall to bits in front of our
Yeah.
eyes.
Well, I
I'm
will
not
quote.
saying Champagne is
Oh, sorry.
as bad. Okay, we do not
Yeah.
have a Donald Trump. Okay, please do
No.
not say that I said one of our rulers is like Donald Trump, because that's not what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is things that we thought were set in stone, like democracy in America and superiority of champagne, are a lot
Well,
less solid than we believe.
let me tell you one
Even
thing that was just the most shocking thing I've seen all year was I was watching a big budget Netflix drama, a bunch of billionaires swilling around a room in a cocktail party, big, big, they're all billionaires and millionaires and something, and there's a grand piano, all in cocktail dresses. And then the leading lady says, go and get a bottle of Prosecco. And that was a moment for me where I realized,
was
10
this a
years ago,
reality show or was this a movie?
it was a TV show. I asked my wife because I tried to remember what it was. It was about a month or two ago, and I couldn't
Oh my
remember what the
god!
show was. I've got to try and find it. But it was
But
a real whoa. We are in a different time because 10
yeah,
years
but
ago that would never have happened.
there was a Ferrari Trento that took over the Grand Prix, so now
Yeah,
I'm waiting. Don't has it again, but the fact that somebody else had it shows
yeah,
that there are alternatives. I think there there is a real there was a great talk, which unfortunately I didn't hear because I was at the AGM of the AGV at the Sparkling Wine Forum about why Italian sparkling is so popular. So I've written to the lady to get the information, but it's true. I think we should analyze that Italian market, because the Italians,
mm,
they they are very clever at this. I remember I
yeah.
worked in New Zealand when we thought that Sauvignon Blanc was going to be the hottest thing ever, and Pinot Grigio came, boom, and exploded the market. Champagne, a little bit the same. Prosecco, woo, all over the place, doing the same thing. Prosecco is now going to make, top cuvées, superiore. So, obviously that will impact. The rosé had a huge impact. So
Yeah,
I
I
think,
do.
but that's why I think innovation is so important. There's the different brands will continue to exist. It is just, where is the general champagne brand going? And that
Yeah.
is going to be a difficult thing to us. And I think too many people like us, like you and me, um, we believe, we live in a bubble. We live in the Trump bubble, if you want. We live in our own bubble where we think that, even though, I'm very different to most sparkling wine journalists because I don't go to many other regions. The only ones I really know quite a bit about is Corpinat. And then, I just read the figures for the sales. I'm not necessarily going anywhere. I live in Champagne, I ride on Champagne, and I ride on the ecology. That's it. But I think for a lot of other people, they they want the status quo. So it's quite interesting because we live in an area where the press also wants the status quo, not just the growers and the houses, but the consumers are moving on. So therefore, we all need to raise questions, if you see what I'm saying. And, we all need to, find a different way to talk about champagne, to point out the issues. It's easier to do this in an independent channel. I know, having written a little bit for Decanter before as well, Wine Searcher gives me a lot more freedom than I've had anywhere else. Um, but I think it's important that we double check everything, and that we don't just assume that
Mm,
because a big brand or because we're invited or because it's really brilliant, that therefore all consumers do that. And I think also the last thing that I want to say on that is a lot of people don't want to hear about experiences that they cannot have. That's one of the things I see from the young people. So a lot of the
Mm.
experiences we get, other people cannot have. Okay. So they're not really that interested in this anymore.
Yeah.
And I think, we saw this is to do with, we see it everywhere. People, they
Mm.
aspire to things, but they want to know that they can have that same thing. And if they see that this is not possible, they shift.
Yeah.
Prosecco is, it's easy, it's accessible, and everyone can have it, and everyone can have a party, and you know
Yeah.
cava in a way as well, but there wasn't enough. But there's English sparkling wine, there's American sparkling wine, there's New Zealand sparkling wine, there's Great Cup Classique, there's Australian sparkling wine, there's Chinese sparkling wine, South American, Chilean, Argentinian. We have it everywhere. Okay, and even in France, we have Cremant, we have Petnat, we have all different things. So, you know, I think people drink less. They have choices to make. They need to want to choose champagne, and not just because you and I have an affinity for champagne, but because they have that affinity for champagne.
Hmm.
That's my last
Couldn't
thing.
agree more. Yes.
Do you have anything to say? You want to finish on something before my
Oh,
phone crashes again?
we've covered a lot of ground. Um,
We should do this again, actually.
yeah. Well, there's a once you
I
start
can't
getting
do all such
into.
stuff. I'll let you do all the technical stuff.
Oh no, no, no. No, that was very, very, very interesting. Thank you for inviting me. I'm not sure I've got a great deal to add on that. I mean, it'd be fun to talk more, to look more at some point at, at Spain and at Italy and England
The
and to
different
sort of see
markets.
what, how different some of those other sparkling wine
Yeah, I was
um,
hoping we would do that
production
today,
is
but then
structured. Oh,
obviously we got into champagne, and it still has a lot of magic over you and me. Obviously,
oh
that
yeah,
is we're not going to deny it. When people ask me if I like champagne, I was like, I live here. How much more do I need to prove that I like champagne?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah. All right.
All right.
Well, thank you very
Well,
much,
thanks so
Tom.
much.
Yes. Please, like I would be really interesting to hear your view about the other sparkling wine, because obviously, if we know what's going on in the different sparkling wine markets, it's easier maybe for champagne to learn lessons on what it needs to do or it can do, uh,
Mm,
to move forward. It will have to change. Change is never easy,
mm.
and in my opinion, what we know as champagne and how the system worked, things may not be like this in the next decade. That's just,
No, no.
but
Could get well, yeah. And then the interesting question is how? For me, how now does it change?
but the
What
thing is,
happens?
there's always a way. There's
Yeah,
always a way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's
Yeah,
always a way.
yeah, yeah. Not how does it change in that, it can't, but actually what's going to happen precisely is
We're
interesting.
going to have to
But
wait
well,
and see.
yeah, we will. Yeah.
We,
All right.
sometimes things happen so quickly, and they are so crazy, like what we've seen in America, for
Yeah.
instance, that we think this is not possible. Me, who grew up under apartheid in South Africa, I cannot, for me, it's like crazy to see that people are going to the system, that they voted for this, that they're going back into it. Okay.
Mm.
And you think, no, surely not in America. But, things change, people change. And at the end of the day, the power is with the people, whether the people are the voters or they are the consumers of sparkling wine.
Well, with that, I'm afraid I actually have to leave you now.
Yeah, I'm
But
gonna have to go.
enjoy the sunshine. I'm going to be there in
Okay,
a few
thank you
weeks. I
so
hope it's
much.
still.
Yes, I'm gonna go back outside now.
I hope it's still there in a couple of weeks when I
Yeah,
come over.
come see me. Come soak up
Come
some
take it.
sun in the sun trap.
Sounds good.
Bring
All right.
sunscreen.
Goodbye,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye bye. I'm going
Bye
to
bye.
end it. Bye bye.
All right, I'll let you press the button.